G'day everyone, Messmer the Impaler has become well known already for his relentless and lethal moveset that features a variety of flame-powered spear attacks and very high mobility. Messmer actually has a lot of rather generous windows to attack him in, more so than many other bosses in the DLC or base game I thought. But the issue is that his damage is so high, many of his combos will 100 to 0 you very quickly, not giving you a chance to respond. So once we can dodge his combos, we want to get in the highest damage and stance damage that we can in a short window. So my build for this boss focuses on using a colossal sword with the Giant's Hunt ability. He is also very resistant to magic, fire, lightning and holy damage, but rather weak to blood loss it seems, so my colossal sword has the blood affinity. But I'll show you my build and kill in more detail later. For now, let's take a look at his moveset and the really important combos you need to be comfortable dodging. I'll start with what I call his basic attacks, which are generally standalone and not flame empowered. The first is this double swipe disengage. He often uses this when you're close to him in melee range, between abilities to kind of reset. You know this one's coming when he takes this kind of low stance, with his spear low on his left side. It comes out quite quickly, so as soon as you see this, 2 dodges back to back. His other basic combo is also 2 parts, starting with this circular sweep, followed by a ground thrust. You know it's coming when he starts to turn with the spear at his head like this, again without any fire on the spear. This one comes out a fair bit slower and will require a delayed dodge, followed by an even more delayed dodge for the ground thrust. This ground thrust is also used in one of his main 2 types of fire attacks, so it's vital you learn the timing to dodge it because it's one of your best windows to counter attack with. I recommend waiting for the gravel sound as your cue to dodge. Another one of his basic attacks is his leap and spear throw, which is very obvious, you can see it coming like this. Now you should always dodge into this one because it's a great window to punish him on the other end. And as you can see, he often uses that double swipe to disengage. He has a single and a double standalone thrust like these ones here, which are both pretty easy to dodge. He can also randomly throw out these little fire orbs that chase you before or after most combos throughout the fight. Now let's get into the good stuff and talk about the 2 broad types of fire empowered combos. So for the purposes of this, we'll call them right hand fire or spear fire. And that's because that is the main thing throughout the fight that you are watching for like a hawk. So to be clear, right hand fire is whenever he starts a combo by throwing a handful of fire at you like this. It is most often preceded by him doing a sidestep and a thrust, or a leaping thrust from afar. But he can chain it off the back of a number of attacks. For example here, he does it after the running grab attack. Spear fire is whenever he starts a combo by lighting his spearhead on fire. It is often the very first thing he does, but sometimes he follows any of the basic attacks like this double sweep here. The important thing is that he lights his spearhead on fire without doing the right hand fire thing. So what do these mean? Well, when you see the right hand fire, you know that a 4 to 5 part thrust and slashing combo will always follow. There's also 3 possible variations of this combo, and I'll show you how to recognize them in a moment. When you see the spear fire, he's usually about to throw fire from the end of his spear at you 2 or 3 times. But sometimes he'll do a slash or a thrust as well. The main thing you should be thinking is that this nearly always ends with an uppercut slash into the air and then a downwards plunge with his spear. These 2 types of broad attacks form the bulk of the dangerous combos throughout the whole fight, phase 1 and 2. So let's take a look at them in detail. He will always follow the right hand fire itself with a single powerful thrust. That's the same on all 3 variations. And so his very next movement is what you're watching for to know how the combo ends. So for the first variation, he'll follow the thrust by turning counterclockwise a little bit with the spear in the air, like you can see here. In this case, he'll do a horizontal sweep, followed by the very delayed ground thrust that we saw before. Let's see it a few times at full speed. All 3 of these dodges are pretty slow, there'll be a pretty decent delay between each. You'll just have to get used to the timing. It's also good to know that after any of the right hand fire combos, all 3 variations, there's always time for a decent counterattack. You can use Giant Hunt, you can also just poke him out of your last roll, or you can do a heavy charged attack. In the next variation, again, after the fire hand, he'll do that first thrust, and then this time, he'll do an evasive sidestep away from you like this. When you see this, he's going to finish with an overhead thrust, followed by a counterclockwise sweep. This time, in terms of dodge timing, you're going to have a small delay while he's evading away from you, and then your next 2 rolls are pretty much back to back. And in the last variation, after that first thrust, he's not going to turn around or evade away, he's going to stay still where he is and prepare for more thrusts like this. In this case, he's going to do 2 quick jabs, followed by a final delayed thrust. Let's see it again. For these ones, the double jab needs back-to-back immediate rolls, with a much more delayed one for the last one. It's also good to dodge to the left and behind him in general for this. That's it for the right hand fire combos. Let's take a look now at the spear fire combos. When the boss starts with his spear fire and he's standing a little bit away from you, he's generally about to throw a couple of waves of fire at you like this. I got hit by that first one because I was drinking a flask, but generally they're pretty easy to see coming and easy enough to dodge. After he's thrown the fire, he's going to do an uppercut slash that if you're in melee range would hit you, but if you're out of range like this, he's just going to leap into the air and then plunge down onto you. After the plunge, you've always got time to retaliate with a bit of damage. With that in mind, you should always roll forward into the plunge, so you're straight away in position to hit him. Here's an example where he immediately follows the double sweep basic combo. He lights his spearhead on fire and does a single horizontal sweep, followed by the uppercut and plunge combo. In this instance, because we're in melee range, be mindful that you're going to have to dodge the uppercut slash, as well as, after a slight delay, the plunge. One last example where he lights his spear on fire first is this flying spin attack where he closes the gap. I didn't have too much success dodging this one, but then again he always finishes with the uppercut and plunge. He does sometimes use this flying spin attack by itself, but you should always expect the uppercut and plunge anyway. Now before we look at the next phase, let's talk about two of the special attacks you need to be aware of. The first is simple but deadly. It's the running grab attack that you've probably been caught by once or twice already. To dodge this, you really need to wait until he actually starts to move his hand in that underarm motion towards the ground. Once you see that, that's your cue to dodge. And the last one is this crazy multi-part flying spinning combo that you've probably seen once or twice already. It is hard at first, but once you've seen it once or twice, it's actually pretty easy to dodge. You know it's coming when he leaps up into the air and does this fancy twirl with his flaming spear. As soon as his spear reaches about this position, you're going to dodge through him once. He'll fly around in a bit of a half lap and then come back at you with a flurry of jabs. You're going to dodge through that again once more time. At this point, he'll fly up into the air before plunging down, which you'll need to dodge, and then an immediate follow-up dodge for the secondary pulse from the ground. You can squeeze a hit in after this as well. And again in full time. I know this is in phase 2, but the attack is the same in both phases. This one is hard at first, but it's only 4 dodges once you get the timing down. Alright, so at around 50% health, you'll get a cutscene and you'll transition into phase 2. And honestly, unlike a lot of other bosses, phase 2 on Messmer is kind of easier or not really any harder than phase 1 at the very least. He basically does all the same attacks that he does in phase 1, but every now and then he'll transform into the big snake and lunge at you. These snake attacks are generally very easy to see, you've got a bit of time, and they're well telegraphed, so they're actually not too bad. They're also usually only a single, maybe a double strike, so they're very rarely going to 100 to 0 you like most of his combos in phase 1 do. As you can see, the snakehead strikes are pretty obvious, they're not going to catch you off guard too much, and honestly I found them pretty intuitive in terms of timing for the dodge roll. The other thing to be aware of is that after he transforms and does a few attacks as a snake, he'll transform back into his normal human form in the location that the snake head was when it finished, so be aware of that. He gets a few new somersaults and dashes like this, and when you see these puddles on the ground, obviously just get out of those, he's about to strike from there. Other than that, I actually don't have a lot to add here. Most of the dangerous stuff that will kill you is the same dangerous stuff that will kill you in phase 1. So I'll show you my kill attempt now with a bit of commentary, and we'll look at the build in a little more detail as well. Now, if you haven't already worked it out, you get a free attack just a few seconds into the fight, so any pre-buffs are a good idea. He always starts the fight with this exact same ability, which you should dodge and then get a free attack in. If you're running the same build I am, use a Giant's Hunt here. Now, this is by far from a perfect or a clean kill. I was actually still kind of testing this fight a little bit when I accidentally killed him with the bleed proc in the phase 2. During this attempt, I was actually just testing to see how many Giant Hunts it would take to stance break him, and so I was taking a very offensive approach, being quite reckless, and as you can see, as a result, I'm getting hit by quite a lot of those small basic hits. But honestly, with a little more care maybe, I think an offensive approach like this is definitely the way to go. Because between this Giant Hunt and the bleed proc, we're doing about 6.7k damage, and we're now going to follow it up with a critical that's doing another 5+k damage. That was 4 Giant Hunts, by the way, to break his stance if you want to replicate this. Now, phase 2 starts with a similar slam and explosion that you'll want to punish. I found the dodge on this kind of hard to time. What worked for me is hitting dodge the second the snake's head went up off the top of my screen. Again, you'll want to use a Giant Hunt after that explosion, and as you can see, the Giant Hunt's doing pretty respectable damage too. It's also worth noting that if you don't have a Scatutry Blessing of at least level maybe 10, you're probably going to really struggle with this boss. Even though you can get to Messmer quite early, I think he's intended to be one of the last bosses you fight, and so if you haven't collected many Scatutry fragments yet, you're probably really going to struggle, and he's just going to stat check you. The strategy in phase 2 is no different from phase 1 though. You're basically waiting for those opportunities after each of his big combos, and use those windows to cast Giant Hunt. So while I keep chipping away and he nearly kills me, let's talk about my build real quick. I'm using the colossal sword called Greatsword, not to be confusing, with the blood affinity. I have about 60 strength and 45 arcane, so it scales pretty well. The bleed build up is 160, and so it only took 4 hits to proc the bleed. For damage, I'm using the Shard of Alexander and the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. I'm also using the Great Jar's Arsenal so I can equip more defensive armor, and the Flame Drake Talisman for fire mitigation. You could swap that out with the Dragon Crest Great Shield too. For armor, you just want to take whatever you can that gives you the most defenses while still maintaining a medium roll. I'm using the entire Veterans set here because it gives good defenses, but it also looks cool, and that's important, isn't it? For Crystal Tiers, I'm using the Opaline Hard tier for more mitigations, as well as the Green Burst Crystal tier, just for more stamina regen. You could swap this out for anything really, that's just a general use one. And as you see here in a sec, I kill him with the bleed proc. I normally would die once I've got them in kill range so I can get a clean kill, or test different builds. But oh well, this one was a bit messy, but it still demonstrates the viability of this Giant's Hunt plus bleed build. That's everything. As always, if you got something out of this video, please drop a like, comment or subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Thanks for listening everyone. Cheers.